Good morning, everybody. My name, for those of you who haven't met me, is Kelton Lewis. I am the Director of Sales and Vendor Relations for CIA Medical, which is a specialty wholesale distributor of medical supplies based locally out of Skokie, Illinois. Since the COVID-19 pandemic began, we have successfully shipped and delivered over 1,000 full truckloads of medical supplies to our various end users across the nation. We have also donated hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of medical supplies to various end users in need, inclusive of first responders, homeless shelters, schools, veterinary clinics, VA hospitals, and most recently to the people of Ukraine. It has been a great honor and privilege to play a small role in helping get essential medical supplies to the people who need them most these past few years. It's my pleasure now to introduce our next program, Dementia, the Other Pandemic, and How to Protect Vulnerable Adults, as well as our featured speakers. First, I am proud to introduce you to Kerry Peck. Kerry is the managing partner of the Chicago law firm Peck, Rickey, LLC, where he concentrates his practice in trust and estate litigation, estate planning, guardianship and fiduciary litigation, and elder law. His clients include families, hospitals, banks, the state of Illinois, Cook County, and the city of Chicago. Mr. Peck is the past president of the 22,000 Lawyers Chicago Bar Association, and he has been appointed by the Illinois Supreme Court as chair of the recently Illinois Supreme Court Commission on Elder Law. He was retained by the City of Chicago Department of Aging to rewrite state Illinois Elder Abuse Neglect Act. Kerry has also co-written books Alzheimer's and the Law, as well as Don't Let Dementia Steal Everything. He is a frequent speaker at continuing education seminars for attorneys and healthcare professionals across the country. And then next we have Teri Dreher. Teri is a nationally recognized leader in the emerging field of patient advocacy. In 2011, she left a long career in critical care nursing to form North Shore Patient Advocates, now one of the country's largest professional patient advocacy companies. Teri is also the founder of Seniors Alone Guardianship and Advocacy Services, a nonprofit organization that serves senior orphans and disabled adults in the Chicagoland area. She has written several books, including Patient Advocacy Matters, Nurse Advocate, Entrepreneur, and has co-chaired several and local national conferences, including this one. She also happens to be my mother. So let's give a warm welcome to our speakers. Do you want me to go sit down over there? Or
It's okay. Well, hello. I'm very grateful to be here. That was a fabulous panel today, and I was just so excited about what everybody had to say. It is a privilege to be part of this industry, and today I really wanted to talk about what I call the other pandemic, because we've seen dementia clients just explode. And I started doing some of the research behind this because, at least in Illinois and probably every state in the union, there have been extra laws during the pandemic that are protecting vulnerable adults. And I've had the privilege and great pleasure of working with Kerry Peck. He's one of the top lawyers in the Chicago area, and I'm really happy that he agreed to speak with me today because he is an expert on dementia and the law and has literally written the book. And I think probably over half of my client population right now, we have close to 50 different clients, and over half of them, there's some dementia. So we're seeing this grow and grow and grow, and I'm sure you are in your practices too. And I think it behooves all of us to become really expert at taking care of dementia clients and recognizing signs of abuse. And so that's what we want to talk about today. It's just, I have to get this pop-up off here. So that's why I called today's program Dementia, the Other Pandemic, and How to Protect Vulnerable Adults. Okay. Where's my audio-visual friend? AV guys. I just have to see how to, maybe I just say enter to get it to go forward. Oh, okay. Okay. Oh, great. Okay. So first of all, what is dementia? Most of you in this room certainly know what dementia is, but a brief rundown. Dementia is not one particular illness. Just like cardiovascular disease, dementia is a group of different illnesses. There are 10 main types of dementia, and it is really important to know what kind of dementia your client has so that you know how to get them evaluated and treated most appropriately. When I have a new client that I think is showing any kind of cognitive impairment, or their adult children call and cry out for help, the first thing I want to do is get a neuropsych eval done. And I'll talk more about that in a minute, because it's really important to know, do they have a true, pure Alzheimer's? Do they have a frontotemporal? Do they have a Korsakoff syndrome? Do they have one of the other type of dementias that are treated differently? We had a 53-year-old client that came to us about a year ago, and she was exhibiting signs of dementia at 53 years old. And that really worried me, because I thought, oh my goodness, usually it's like the earlier you start showing signs of dementia, the faster it progresses. Did everybody here see that movie, Still Alice? That was a fabulous movie, and it really showed the angst and the pain that families go through and the patients go through themselves when they know that they're losing some of their cognitive abilities. It's really, really scary. And El Dorado, my director of nursing, and myself, we see a lot of people. We just had a senior orphan come to us a couple weeks ago. I have an article in the Daily Herald, a column, and she read my column, and she called and she said, I think I'm a senior orphan. I need help. And we went over to meet her, and this woman is over 90 years old, and she's living by herself on a busy street, and she's still driving. And as we sat there and took the intake, I thought, oh my, we need to get a neuropsych evaluation on her. But the tricky part for her, without any family, is that she doesn't have any of her estate plan done. So before we do anything, we have to go to the lawyer. And the lawyer told us to, first of all, go to our primary care physician and get a letter saying that she has testamentary capacity. And I'm sure Kerry will talk a little bit about that too. But we see people all the time, and there's a real art form to how you get who involved in a dementia case, and all of us are going to be seeing this more. Probably over half of us in this room, ladies and gentlemen, if we live long enough, we're going to have some form of dementia. So, unfortunately. So we're not scientists, we're not all about the cure, but we do need to make a better tomorrow for elderly people in our country, adults with disabilities that do get this terrible, heartbreaking disease, because I call it a family disease if they do have a family, because families are suffering. They're just suffering in a really heartbreaking way. So the prevalence is growing. In 2015, there were 47 million cases worldwide. And in 2030, there are going to be 76 million cases worldwide. 2050, we're going to have 135,500,000 cases worldwide, at least. So why is it growing? I don't think anybody really knows for sure yet. We do know that people in higher income communities are a little bit protected. Maybe it's because people can afford organic food and they can take supplements and they read and they have better social interaction and intellect. But We're not really sure why, but we do know it's growing at a scary, scary rate. I mean, it might have to do with all the pesticides in our water that we've been drinking for decades and decades. If they stopped all of that right now, it would still take over 25 years for all that stuff to get out of our food source. So we don't really know why, we just know it's growing. And we have to really start paying a lot of attention to protecting the most vulnerable people in our society. So as I said before, the first thing I want to do to evaluate an objective set of data is to call my favorite neuropsychologist in the Chicagoland area, and she'll go and interview somebody for maybe an hour, hour and a half. And it just seems like she's having a nice little friendly talk. She might come back one or two other times, but most of the time she'll just go in for about an hour, hour and a half, and asks a lot of questions. And by the end of that time, she can tell what kind of dementia, if there are behavioral health issues on top of it, or if there are focal deficits, signs of maybe a brain tumor or a stroke. We need to follow up with MRIs or something like that. She's absolutely brilliant. She gives us a 3 to 4 page printout. Tomorrow afternoon, I'm going to go over to the home of one of our recent clients who's in her 80s right now and having some safety issues at home. And we're going to sit down and talk to her about the results of her dementia evaluation. We told her we were testing her memory. And this is an interesting lady. Her name is Janet, and we went over to her home, and it was the daughter, who happens to be a lawyer, and myself. The daughter has a very loving relationship with her mom and myself, and the poor woman was worried all week about who this strange nurse that's coming into her home is. I'm going to force her to do something that she doesn't want to do. So I came in and I put on my nice, loving nurse hat and sat down and assured her right away, I don't force anybody to do anything at all. I'm a consultant, and you have a right to decide yourself whether or not you want to live at home, whether it's best for you to think about a senior community, but I'm not here to force you to do anything. But she had hidden her purse before I came because she thought maybe I was going to steal her money. And at the end of the time I was there, she admitted that she didn't know where her purse was. So the daughter and I spent a half hour finding her purse. We finally found it in the front hall closet, stuffed behind some bags. And it took us a half hour to find it. And at the end of that, it's like the light bulb went off. Oh, I guess I do have a problem with my memory. So we ended up, she hugged me, and it's going to be wonderful. So I'm going to go over there tomorrow and just explain to her what the results of the test showed and what kind of things we need to do. So after we do a neuropsych exam, we generally want to find them a really good neurologist that specializes in dementia care. Not all neurologists are created equal, ladies and gentlemen, so we really want that. And if there's any kind of a competency issue at stake, for instance, they don't have any estate planning, it's amazing to me how many people have no estate plans when they're in their 80s or 90s. And so sometimes we have to get a psychiatrist to come in and evaluate whether or not that person has capacity to make their own decisions and handle their own affairs. But I just want to say that the impact upon society and families is very, very deep. And the cost is extreme too. When I sit down in the Chicagoland area and I explain the difference in cost between staying at home, paying your taxes, doing the upkeep and everything like that, and having home care come in and stay with you for 8 or 10 hours a day, or maybe even 24 hours a day, versus going to an assisted living and memory care facility, sometimes that's what makes the decision, their financial capacity. Very few people we come in contact with have $2 or $3 million when they're in their 80s and 90s. So Anyway, we had a client, and you've probably had Holocaust survivor clients before too, but Maggie was unforgettable to me. Her family came to me because they were at wit's end. The husband had heart problems, and he just couldn't handle it anymore, and the girls were taking turns coming off work, and they couldn't take off anymore. And so they said, we don't know what to do, because 2 or 3 years ago, Maggie gave away most of their life savings when she still could use the internet. And so they have a reverse mortgage on their home. They don't have any money. They lived on a busy street in Mundelein, and Maggie was out in the backyard with a rake chasing her husband and doing all kinds of self-damage things. But more heartbreaking was she'd wake up in the middle of the night beating her husband on the back and screaming and crying. Turns out Maggie was 12 years old in a camp in World War II. And I'm sure that the SS guys were not very nice to little teenage girls in World War II camps. So we ultimately got her and her husband into a nice assisted living. We got a little dog for her so she didn't need so many medications, and she and her husband are very happy today. But that broke my heart. It was just a really sad case, and the family came to us and said, oh my God, we never could have done this without you. And I said, that's what advocates do. We find solutions for people no matter what their financial capacity. We protect people, we educate people, we empower people. We fill all the gaps in modern health care. So anyway, the very most vulnerable people in our society today are senior orphans and adults with disabilities, and that's why I just am so pleased that I've gotten to know Kerry, and he and I have talked about a few cases and how difficult it is sometimes to help people that either don't want help or there are obstacles. So I think if you don't have an elder law attorney at your side in your community, go out and find who the best one is in your community all over the place and become best friends with them, because you are going to find people that need legal protection. And you're going to need people that need to have their estate plans done. Right around here, we have adult protective services, but like Kerry has told me before, they're a tiger with no teeth. They're very nice. They go in, she seems fine. But there's a lot of senior financial exploitation and emotional exploitation and abuse, and it's a real art form. You need a good lawyer like Kerry. So I'm going to let Kerry tell you the high-level stuff, and please, please come up and ask questions when he's done. Thank you.
Good job. Great presentation, Teri. So, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm honored to be with you today, and it's great to see some old friends and make some new friends. And I'm going to talk a little bit about, as we've called this presentation, the other pandemic. But I have to tell you, the other pandemic is a pretty ugly pandemic. Every single day of the week, my law firm is besieged with calls regarding older adults that are being financially exploited. And that financial exploitation comes quite commonly by loving family members. And those loving family members are interested, they love mom or dad's money a lot more than they love mom or dad. And the pandemic and the isolation and the stress of COVID has caused people to act in extreme fashions. And let me give you an example. I got a call one day from folks here in town, And they report to me that their mother, who was in one of the finest facilities in the Chicago metropolitan area, had been kidnapped by their sister. And mom was taken, could somebody turn off their telephone, please? Mom was taken to a hotel and checked in under an assumed name and held hostage until she did a new estate plan. So how did we resolve it? Well, we had a private investigator ultimately track down mom at the hotel. I filed for guardianship. We overturned that estate plan. But that is the most extreme, and we probably have a dozen cases that are some component of that in the context of the pandemic. So the pandemic really, as we all know, has been a major health crisis. It's certainly been a major mental health crisis. But I think it's been a horrific crisis for older adults for clearly a lot of reasons: isolation, the negative impact, of course, of COVID, but the fact that exploiters used it as kind of a cover to get in to the minds and the wallets and the bank accounts and the brokerage accounts of the older adults throughout our country. The Chicago metropolitan area is far from alone in the context of my friends and colleagues around the country calling me and discussing similar situations throughout the country. Unfortunately, and we have a lot of top flight members of the aging community, and a lot of you have home health agencies and are involved in home health agencies, but regrettably, home health agencies, and particularly those unaffiliated caregivers, are leading the pack in financial exploitation. I've been involved in literally dozens of cases now in which a younger woman is alone 24/7 with an older man, and one thing leads to the next, and I'm the only lawyer in Chicago that will step up in front of the judge and go, "Judge, this is a sex for signatures case." And it's just exactly that. It's trade sex for a signature on a deed, for a signature on a will, for a signature on a trust, for a signature on an amendment to the trust. And some of those documents require witnesses, but the caregivers always seem to find somebody that was in the room at the time that that signature occurred. And so at the end of the day, between loving family members and dishonest caregivers, and of course total strangers, older adults today are abused financially on a very regular basis on the internet. We've been involved in a number of romance scams. You look at each other and you go, "Romance scam? What are you talking about?" I was involved in a case in which a woman who was a leader in her community, gave away 6 figures to her lover that she never met on the internet. He was coming to marry her. He told her he loved her. And the doctor testified, the psychiatrist, that this woman's capacity was absolutely perfect except for this one area of her brain that allowed her to be scammed into believing that she was going to marry this man that she never met from South Africa. And each time he had another reason to ask for more money, whether it was plane tickets, et cetera, et cetera. So older adults are tremendously vulnerable. And collectively, all the people in this room, we need to protect older adults. We need to engage and embark on public education programming to protect older adults. And what do we do when an older adult is financially exploited? Well, Teri told you the first thing we should do is try and persuade that older adult before they're financially exploited to do some estate planning. I mean, estate planning, basic estate planning these days is pretty simplistic. You know, here in Illinois and generally throughout the country, we have two types of powers of attorney. And those powers of attorney are a power of attorney for health care and a power of attorney for, some states call it finance, in Illinois it's called property. And it's not real estate, it's assets. And what is that document? Many of you know, but I think it's worth discussing. We create a principal-agency relationship. I am the principal, not of the school, okay? And I name Teri as my agent to manage my health care decisions or manage my assets when I can't do it myself. Now, interestingly enough, older adults that are reluctant to do this, and clearly many, many are, or they lack the capacity to do that, without planning of that nature, there's only one remedy. That is, you have to file for guardianship. Because if I'm deemed to be incapable of making my decisions and I have no planning, I can't sign the document. And so I have to have a guardian, a judicial determination as to, do I need a guardian to make my decisions? And guardians also come in two flavors: a guardian of the estate, management of assets; guardian of the person, management of health care. And who should that guardian be? Well, once again, we get back to that loving family, where that loving family, if they exist, is tearing each other apart so that they can be mom's guardian, because each one of them believe they will have a leg up in inheriting mom's money. Okay? This is almost always follow the money, you know? It's a bad movie. So at the end of the day, when we file for guardianship, which is potentially a protracted, ugly, expensive process, it gets involved in a scenario where each side, and it's generally, again, the kids, as I mentioned, they tear each other apart to demonstrate to a judge and their mother that they're in love with their mother and they're best suited to care for their mother. Guardianship cases, guardianship court, require fundamentally at the beginning a medical report. And again, running through almost all of our discussion this morning is a medical report. Okay. Thank you, sir. And so that medical report is going to be used for, number one, is this individual capable of executing an estate plan? Do they have testamentary capacity? Testamentary capacity is defined primarily by 4 elements. And the fancy legal language is the individual knows the natural objects of their bounty. What does that mean in English? It means they know their family. The second element is they know the nature and extent of their assets, okay? That means, can they tell me, I have a bank account, I have a stock brokerage account, I own a house. They also have to have the capacity to form a plan in their mind. And I suggest to you that that's the most difficult element of assessing testamentary capacity. And the fourth element is, do they know they're signing a will and or a trust? So as we determine that testamentary capacity on a regular basis, if we have a concern in my law firm that John Doe doesn't have the capacity to sign, well, we need to get you assessed, John. No, I won't do it. Okay. You understand that your planning is designed to protect your desires, your wishes when you're gone. Well, I don't want to do it. I'll get another lawyer. I go, okay, great. Please do that. Because if we have concerns about your capacity, we're not going to do your estate plan. Now, I prefer to go to somebody's attending physician to get a background on their mental capacity. If you have a long-term relationship with your doctor, they've watched the peaks and valleys, and they usually are able to determine if you have the capacity to sign legal documents. Many attending physicians want nothing to do with the issue, okay? Many attending physicians want nothing to do in the context of diagnosing their patient with Alzheimer's disease. It just seems to be running through the process. So as a result, we have them assessed by a consulting physician, usually a psychiatrist or perhaps a neuropsychiatrist. But in Illinois, for certain, all of these documents, the medical evaluations, need to be written by MDs. A PhD in this scenario doesn't work. So when we file for guardianship, when we assess capacity to sign documents, we need some certainty. Now, obviously, if an 80-year-old comes into my conference room and is able to engage in conversation that evidences they are competent, then it's certainly not necessary to have a medical report or a medical evaluation done on that individual. So in the context of financial exploitation, we file for temporary guardianship. Temporary guardianship is an urgent, exigent procedure. It's a process in which we ask the court to promptly entertain the petition to appoint a temporary guardian in a financial exploitation case to freeze the assets. Okay? Typical case, I was involved in a case in which the family called, Kerry, what's going on? Mom died. Dad was a retired professional. Mom was sick for 3 or 4 years, quite sick. Dad would go to church every Sunday. The third or fourth Sunday after his wife dies and he buries her, Dad goes to church, and lo and behold, there's a 40-year-old gal that sits down next to him in the church pew. And this was, ladies and gentlemen, love at first sight of his wallet. She, the first week they met, took him to his stockbroker, took him to his accountant, both of whom, to their credit, had the fortitude to say, "Who are you? Get out of my office." Okay? But that didn't prevent her from moving into the marital home. The family says, "Well, what do you think, Kerry?" I said, "Well, have you visited the home?" "Well, no, we haven't been there yet. We don't want to see her. We can't believe she's taken the home over where we grew up and where my mother lived." I said, "Well, I think it's time to go visit. I think you need to talk to Dad, find out what he's thinking." And of course, Dad's response was, "Everything is fine." Dad was a mere 35 years older than his newfound love interest. So fortunately, we had Dad evaluated. Fortunately, the physician concluded Dad was in fact cognitively impaired, and we filed for temporary guardianship to freeze his assets so that he would have that money for his own health care and, parenthetically, ladies and gentlemen, for the children to inherit, which ends up being a pretty important factor in all of these cases. So what happens when a guardian's appointed? Guardian's appointed to, again, in that case, freeze Dad's assets, to put in potentially in-home care for Dad, literally to try and push out the love interest and this woman just did not want to leave. She knew a good thing in her mind when she saw it, and she just went at it and stuck with it like glue. So when a temporary guardian is appointed, that guardian's powers are limited to the power given by the judge. And that may be the power to freeze the money. That may be the power to disperse money for particular reasons and rationale, unlike a full guardian that has powers under the statute. A temporary guardian has limited powers because it's designed for this emergent procedure. Now, all the bank accounts in a guardianship need to be retitled. You can see in the bottom right, we retitle those assets, either temporary or what's called plenary, P-L-E-N-A-R-Y, which means full guardian. That's the term here in Illinois. How are we doing on time?
Good. Yeah, we can go a little after 10:30 if you want.
Whatever you want. Don't forget guardians, and Teri does a great job in her agency acting as guardian. If you act as guardian, or I encourage you to, as Teri suggested, make sure you affiliate with an elder law attorney that knows what he or she is doing, because as guardian, you have the fiduciary obligation, the highest obligation under the law, to account for that money. You can't commingle that money. You need to put that money in a guardianship account. You need to keep very, very good records, okay? You need to keep records on expenditures, income, and your time, because you are going to ask the court to be paid from those assets. So, critically important. Likewise, if you're engaged as a home health agency in a guardianship, same scenario, keep good records as to who's in the house, what services are performed, and your time, because you're going to ask the court likewise to be paid from the assets of the then disabled person. That's the terminology post-court determination that someone needs a guardian. That money can only be spent subject to court approval. So again, if we're going to put in a home health agency and they're going to put in 20 hours a week, we need to get approval from the court for that 20 hours a week in advance. This is not the scenario where you do something and beg for forgiveness later. You ask permission up front, okay? So I think the benefits of guardianship are that we can protect older adults in many instances. Sometimes the horse is out of the barn, the money's gone. It's difficult, clearly, to get it back. When a financial abuser puts their money that they stole into real estate, I can get it back. If they put it up their nose, or they put it in their arm, or they spend it out at the casinos, I can't get it back. And I think the people need to understand that, and families are particularly distraught when we say, hey, you know, this caregiver, dishonest caregiver, persuaded your father to go to the bank, put her on as a joint tenant. She hit him up for $250,000 in a cashier's check, and she bolted straight for O'Hare and has left the country. Okay? We see it every single day. So those are the benefits. Some of the pitfalls, and there are pitfalls in guardianship. It is not a panacea. A family's going to air the dirty laundry. They're going to tear each other apart again for control generally of mom or dad's money. It does create a venue and a forum for creditors or claimants to come in and assert that mom or dad owe money. So usually they're legitimate creditors, but there are some that concoct their own schemes. It might be a lengthy process. Once a guardian is appointed, that guardian is going to remain until the judge determines that a guardian's no longer necessary. So that's what we call a restoration proceeding. Can that older adult ever be restored? Typically, in Alzheimer's cases, the answer is a resounding no. The only restoration cases that we ever really see are occasionally a traumatic brain injury case in which someone is able to come back and perform some of their ADLs. In addition, it can be an expensive process. The court appoints a guardian ad litem. The court appoints someone to act as the eyes and ears of the court. I've been appointed in hundreds and hundreds of cases. The judge isn't going to take off their robe and go out and visit the older adult either at their home, the hospital, or the nursing home. They appoint a lawyer to go do it. And that lawyer's job is to advise the older adult of what I call their probate Miranda rights, okay? Everybody's familiar with the Miranda rights. The cops throw the guy to the ground, you know, cuff him up. You have the right to remain silent. Well, in a guardianship, it's not that dramatic, but the older adult has the right to a lawyer if they wish. They have the right to appear in court. They have a right to engage, if they wish, even in a jury trial. Very, 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 very rarely done. In addition, that guardian ad litem, on top of the medical evaluation that the law requires, usually performs and should perform a mini-mental status exam. Date, time, place, person, orientation. You know, years and years and years before the Cubs won the World Series, I would say, when did the Cubs win the World Series? And so, you know, kind of the mayor, the governor, the president, things of that nature. You're familiar with that. And report back to the judge on his or her findings, both orally and in writing. That guardian ad litem is paid from the assets of the guardianship. So it could be mom or dad's assets that are being used. And we've already talked about the accounting, good records. 60 days from the appointment of a guardian, an inventory is necessary. You need to tell the judge, does mom own the house? Is there a mortgage? Does she have a brokerage account at Citibank or Edward Jones or things of that nature? And so this is completely a transparent process. Don't get in it unless you want to completely be transparent. You tell me. Want to talk questions, or what would you like to do?
Yeah, we are going to do questions, but I just wanted to say why I got into the field of guardianship. So most of you know me from North Shore Patient Advocates, but 3 years ago, Jenny Schmidt came from Black Hills Advocates and did the most wonderful presentation on what she does in South Dakota with a lot of the Indian population, and she had been doing guardianship, and my little social justice meter went off in my head, and I said, well, look at all these Alzheimer's patients around here, and most of the people in Chicagoland that are doing guardianship of the person are social workers, but guess what? More and more people are medically complex, and I saw that because we do medically complex cases. So I said, well, I want to start a nonprofit so that we can do guardianship of the person when they do have medically complex cases. And so I think we're one of the very few people in the Midwest that has nurses that do guardianship of the person. Most of our people are extremely mentally ill or they have cognitive disabilities. I would not suggest that new advocates get into this at all. We just do guardianship of the person because finance is not my deal. And I always work with other agencies that are owned by social workers in the Chicagoland area that take care of the assets and everything because, like Kerry said, that is extremely, you have to be very, very accountable. But we're good with medical care management and advocacy. But if anybody wants to know more, talk to Jenny about it or myself about it. But let's take some questions from the audience because this might be new information for some of you.
Is this on? Can you hear me? Yeah, just before we take the questions, I want to say it was mentioned earlier in my intro. I'm very, very pleased and quite proud that just about 2 weeks ago, the Illinois Supreme Court created for the first time in a historic decision the Illinois Supreme Court Commission on Elder Law. and asked me to chair that commission. And when I met with the Supreme Court, I said, Justices, I'm honored to act as chair, but I'd like you to please consider appointing a multidisciplinary commission. So that I persuaded the court to include the director of geriatrics for one of the hospital systems, one of the leading professors and leadership in the dementia care unit down at Northwestern. And so we have law enforcement, we have physicians, we have lawyers, we have judges, and so we've been charged with the responsibility of making recommendations to the court about improvements in the court system dealing with older adults as they come through the court system. And certainly in the context of guardianship cases, Britney Spears is the most infamous case, and the movie I Care a Lot, which was just stunningly Hollywood corruption drama. I can proudly tell you I've never seen that type of corruption and hope never to. But I'm very pleased that here in Illinois, we are in process now of taking steps to design new and creative methods of protecting older adults. So,
That's
questions?
great. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Attorney Peck. I really appreciate your presentation because those are some really crazy scenarios, but we do know that they do exist.
They're all true. They're all true.
So what that leads me to is that as I have been creating and structuring, one of the questions that I do ask when someone calls is I do ask if they have guardianship so that I can stay out of that lane. But what I would like to know is when we're developing contracts, is there something that you can suggest that we put in that contract to protect ourselves, like if a family member is calling and we're helping that family member and say they have 3 other family members, how do you suggest that we design the contract so that we're maybe only dealing with one person assigned that signs the contract, or 2 so that we won't get caught up in some family things because someone else may be the primary caregiver for the family, but sometimes a primary caregiver, they can be for quote unquote maybe a dodo bird because they were the ones who finessed the parent, but they are not really the one who handles business. So any suggestions that you can offer on designing contracts?
Yeah, I think what you need to do is define your client. Who is your client? We lawyers have the same problem, particularly when the family or a family member calls and says, I'm bringing in mom for her estate planning. And they come in and they come into the conference room, and I'm very patient first for about 5 minutes. And I say, thank you very much for bringing in mom. What is it you'd like to say? Well, this is what mom wants in her estate plan, okay? And I say, that's terrific, thank you very much. Have you heard we have the best coffee in Chicago? Because you're going to go out in the lobby and drink as much of it as you'd like. And I'm going to talk with mom alone. And inevitably, mom has a completely different perspective on her estate plan. So in that case, mom is my client. And I define that in my engagement agreement, the contract with the client. So I think that that's what you need to do.
And I also want to say just a couple words about HIPAA. And most of you probably know about the 2021 Cures Act. So the 2021 Cures Act is a federal act that basically makes it very clear all over the country that the medical records are the property of the patient. And as patient representatives, which we are, because we always have them sign a HIPAA form, we, according to the Department of Health and Human Services, we stand in the shoes of the patient. So if we walk into a hospital with a client, they cannot pull a HIPAA on us. I mean, if they want us to sign their own, branded thing, the patient can if they have capacity. But during the COVID pandemic, we in Illinois have been very blessed that our Governor Pritzker worked with the Center for Disabilities and was able to create what's called the support persons in healthcare facilities guideline. And so even in the height of the pandemic, I was able to get into Northwestern, University of Chicago, everything, because I had disabled patients. They have a right to have a patient advocate. They cannot advocate for themselves. And we all know what was happening during the pandemic when family members could not get into hospitals to be that advocate. So I think a really good thing for all advocates to do is stay on top of state and federal laws so that you know what the rights are. Because I'll tell you what, hospital nurses do not understand HIPAA, and they don't know about the 2021. And if they violate that, their hospital can get sued and heavy fines can come down on them. But I just had a nurse last week pull a HIPAA on me. Like, really? Okay, so you need to be professional, kind, respectful, and when people do that, just go up the chain of command and go talk to people about what you do, everything. I'm sorry, go ahead, Jenny.
I'm Jenny Schmidt from Black Hills Advocate,
Thank you.
and I just wanted to encourage patient advocates who've been in practice for a while that there is a place for guardianship and conservatorship. We've done over 100 guardianship and conservatorship cases at our practice. We recently had a guardianship case go all the way to the South Dakota Supreme Court, and we just recently won a judgment in the amount of $375,000 on behalf of our client. You can read about that on our blog, blackhillsadvocate.com. And, you know, in the world that we live in with adult special needs children with aging parents, chronic mental illness, elder orphans, I would say that the guardianship, conservatorship work that we do is some of the most meaningful work that I engage in on behalf of clients. It's a different hat than patient advocacy, and I've also mentored a lot of you into adding that piece to your business. So I just wanted to introduce myself, and if you're interested in booking a slot, you can also do that through our website at blackhillsadvocate.com, and thank you.
Okay. I think we have time for maybe one more question, and then Kerry and I will be down here if anybody has any more questions, because we're going to have a half-hour break after, and I'm going to tell you where the speakers are for the breakout sessions, too. So one more question.
Hi, my name's Cassandra Shella. I'm from the Cleveland area in Ohio. This is my first conference here.
Closer.
Sorry, can you hear me now? Okay.
A little bit closer.
My name's Cassandra. I'm from the greater Cleveland area, and this is my first advocacy conference.
Yay.
But, thank you. My question over guardianship is, my full-time job is a legal guardian. I work for a nonprofit agency out of Cleveland that handles indigent and chronic mentally ill. But my question on the advocacy end is, how do you, I guess, be transparent and across the board, because it's a very fine line in terms of your consulting and particularly more for those elder orphans where they're paying you for your services. How do you stay, I guess, not appearing to like be transparent and all of that kind of stuff so it doesn't look like they're paying you for a service, you're going to take guardianship of them now, and now you're fiduciary over them?
Well, that's why I don't do both, because I think it's a conflict of interest myself. And if you have people that work with you, Kerry, go ahead and answer that, because I know there are a lot of people in the Chicago area that do both.
You're right.
Yeah.
I think you're right.
Yeah, there is a little bit of a conflict of interest, and the courts have such an oversight. When I take over my agency, Seniors Alone Guardianship and Advocacy Services, I want there to be other people managing the money, and I have to present what I think a reasonable budget is. And one of the downsides is that we don't get paid nearly what we charge on our private company. I mean, we get paid a little over half what we normally get through the courts, and then we have to wait 6 to 12 months to get paid. So if you want to get paid right away for all your work, you know, you'll get paid maybe once a year for $10,000 or $15,000, depends on the patient, on the client. But one of the reasons why the guardianship is there is to conserve their assets. So The
Yes, and
courts are all about conserving their
I
assets.
do commend that, especially taking it on the front end, because by the time they get to us, we have many folks on our caseload that had assets at one time.
Yeah.
And they're with us because they're at the point where they have nothing and it's
Right.
non-recuperable. So I commend that aspect of it in terms of preserving it so they don't have to end up on caseloads like mine.
Right, yeah. I get that, and a lot of our cases have to go to the public or state guardian's office.
Right.
I will take any case if they have a couple $100,000 or more, if they're willing. Jenny taught us a couple years ago, her one rule is, I don't do hostile takeovers. And so if I have somebody that's mentally ill that doesn't want guardianship, I won't do it, so.
Thank you.
Let me
Okay.
make a final comment. If we have my law firm, Peck, Rickey, we have a table out here in the hallway. If you'd like to grab a folder with information about the firm and additional information, it includes an article I wrote for the Alzheimer's Association, basically relating to, now that you've been diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease, what do you do? Families, of course, focus as they should on the medical side, but I argue that they should promptly then focus on the legal side, because a diagnosis of Alzheimer's does not always exclude an individual from having the mental capacity to do documents. And you've heard kind of a number of the horror stories of what occurs without those documents. The other thing is that I wrote a book at the request of the American Bar Association. This is a checklist book. It's written for non-lawyers and for folks like yourselves and for families that have a loved one that may have Alzheimer's disease. And I think a couple of these books have been donated to the conference so that they're going to be raffled off later during the course of the conference. But I would encourage you to take a look at this if you're involved with families that have a loved one that has Alzheimer's disease, because you're not going to read the book from cover to cover. You're just going to look for the problem you have. In addition, the foreword to this book and the other book that we did write for lawyers and judges was written by Scott Turow here in Chicago. Scott is a famous, nationally famous author, former prosecutor. He's written a number of books that have been turned into movies and addresses his mother's journey with Alzheimer's disease in this scenario. So, Teri, thank you for the kind invitation. Ladies and gentlemen, appreciate your kind attention. And if we can help you, please let us know. We're a resource for all of the folks in the aging industry throughout the country. Have a great day and enjoy the rest of the conference.
Okay.